Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to show you how I changed the brake pads and rotors on my buddy's 2018 Toyota Tundra. This is going to be pretty straightforward, so let's jump right in. We are going to start with the front brakes, and the first thing we need to do is get the truck up in the air. At the time of this recording, I did not have a floor jack big enough for the truck of this size. So I first put the truck up on some ramps. Then I used this all-in-one jack and jack stand to lift the passenger front wheel just enough off of the ramp. Once the wheel is just above the ramp, go ahead and pull down on the safety lock like this, and then when it bottoms out, you can stop. You could lower the jack a little to make it lock in place, which is probably a good idea. Or you can grab some jack stands. Then remove the ramp. Now we can remove the lug nuts. These are 22mm. If you try to break the lug nuts free with the tire in the air, it will be quite difficult, as you can see. You should always break all 5 free while the tire is on the ground. However, if you have an electric impact like I have right here, you will be able to zip each lug nut off without issue. Once all 5 are off, you should be able to remove the tire. Unless, of course, the previous mechanic forgot to put anti-seize on the rotor's hat to prevent it from sticking, but that's okay. There are ways to get the wheel to break free. I'm going to spray some liquid wrench in between the wheel and rotor in hopes that it will help break down the corrosion holding them together. Then, after letting it set for a few minutes, I started hitting the tire with the palm of my hand while spinning the wheel with the other. Eventually, the wheel broke free. Go ahead and take the wheel off and put it to the side. Now, there is an issue with this side. Can you see it? The left side of the spring fell out of place and is the reason the inner brake pad was squealing and wearing out faster than the outer pad. It's supposed to be in that hole right there in the brake pad. Alright, the first piece of hardware you want to remove is the long spring in the back. This will be easy. You just need to pull the top away from the caliper, kind of like that, and then do the same for the bottom, and then you can remove it. Now this spring is going to be similar. You want to pull the 2 sides out. However, as you can see, the spring is held in by the bottom pin. So let's remove both of them. If yours are loose like these are, you can push them in like this and then you can pull it straight out. If yours are stuck due to rust and corrosion, you can use a punch like this or a small screwdriver and then hammer it out, just like that. Go ahead and remove the spring. Now the brake pads will probably be difficult to remove, so grab yourself some pliers like this and squeeze the brake pad to the caliper. This will push the piston in just enough to loosen the pad for easier removal. Work both sides and then remove each of the pads. When you remove the inner pad, you should notice the low brake indicator. This is what causes your brakes to start squealing when they get low. You want to put the new pads in the exact same way that you took the old ones out. So make sure you put the new one in with the indicator on the inside. There are also these shims on the back of each pad that you will need to remove and install on the new pads if they don't come with new ones. I'll show you what I mean in a little bit. But before removing the 2 caliper bolts, you want to remove this bolt right here in order to give some slack in the brake hose. This will allow you to easily move the caliper out of the way. This is a 12mm bolt. Once you remove that bolt, go ahead and push the bracket out of the way and then screw the bolt back in like this so you don't lose it. Perfect. Alright, let's remove the 2 bolts holding the caliper in place. Break both of the bolts free and then remove the bottom bolt before the top bolt to prevent the caliper from swinging down on you. These are both 19mm. If you are having trouble removing them, try using a pipe over your wrench or a breaker bar. As you can see, I'm having some issues. These bolts are supposed to be torqued down to 73 foot-pounds, so I'm going to assume the shop that installed these pads just used an air gun and zipped them on instead of using a torque wrench. Make sure you use a torque wrench to make removing the bolts easier, and it will prevent you from snapping a bolt too. If you are still having issues, you will probably have to grab some penetrating fluid like I am right here. Spray down both bolts and then let it set for about 5 minutes so it can get into the threads. Before trying to remove them, you need to wipe the bolt heads down because the penetrating fluid is slippery and will cause you to strip the bolt head. I was able to loosen the top bolt with my electric impact, as you can see. Like I said earlier, leave this one in to hold the caliper in place. When I tried removing the bottom bolt, it just was not budging. So I went back to my breaker bar and was able to finally loosen the bolt. Again, make sure you torque these down properly so you don't struggle later on. Before removing the caliper, grab an S-hook or something to hold the caliper up and then figure out where you are going to mount it. I decided to mount it to the spring. That will allow us to compress the piston easier. I'll show you what I mean in a second. Let's get that rotor off of the hub. Again, I'm going to assume the shop forgot to use anti-seize in the hub too, since this rotor is stuck on there pretty good. So I'm going to grab my rubber mallet and give it a few whacks until it breaks free. You can see all the rust flying off as I'm hitting the rotor. Finally, it came off. There will be some rust around the hub assembly, so just knock off what you can. Before we compress the piston in the brake caliper, you need to loosen the cap of your master cylinder. Your fluid will rise as you are compressing the piston, so make sure you check it periodically to make sure it does not overflow. If the fluid starts getting too high, I typically will grab some kind of siphon to remove some of the fluid. Now, in order to compress the piston, you need to place at least one of your brake pads inside, as this special tool does not extend far enough for these big calipers. A tool like this is necessary because you have pistons on both sides of the caliper. The rear brakes have your typical one piston design where you can use a C-clamp to compress the piston. This tool works fine as you can see, it's just awkward if you've never used one before. You will know when the piston is compressed when the tool no longer moves. Once it's compressed, go ahead and remove the tool and the brake pad. Now we can move on to the rotor. You want to grab some brake clean and spray and wipe down the rotor. New rotors come with an oil coating to prevent rust during storage and shipping, so make sure you do this for both sides to ensure peak performance. Let's get that rotor installed. You should grab some anti-seize and apply it to the wheel hub surface like this. While this isn't necessary, this will prevent it from sticking and will be easier to remove the next time you change your brakes. And try to avoid getting any on your wheel studs. If you do, remove it with a towel or a rag. Now we can place the rotor on. After sliding the rotor onto the wheel studs, I like to put a lug nut on to hold the rotor in place while I'm installing the caliper. Otherwise, the rotor will be moving all over the place and will get slightly annoying. Alright, before we grab the caliper and mount it, you are going to want to put thread locker on your caliper bolts. This is a high vibration area, and the last thing you want is for these bolts to loosen over time. That looks good. Now you can release your caliper from the S-hook that is holding it in place, and then you can place the caliper in the correct mounting position. Go ahead and grab a caliper bolt and start threading it in. You may need to move the caliper around a little bit in order to get the holes to line up. Thread it in as far as you can by hand, but do not tighten it until you do the exact same thing with the bottom bolt. We can get back to those bolts in a second. Let's remove the S-hook. And then we can get that brake hose bracket put back in place. Go ahead and remove the bolt. Now you will notice two holes. One is obviously for the bolt and the other is for the top part of the bracket. That helps to hold it in place while you are threading the bolt in. I'm going to add some thread locker to this bolt as well to make sure it won't back off. Now we can tighten the bolt down. This should be torqued to 11 foot-pounds, or you can just snug it down like I am doing, just like that. Alright, so now we can get back to these caliper bolts and tighten them down. Once they bottom out, we have to torque these bolts down to 73 foot-pounds. There's one. And there's the second bolt. Now we can move on to the brake pads. Make sure you grab one with the wear indicator and one without it. Before applying brake grease to the new pads, we need to remove the shims from the old ones. There will be two on each side. This old pad does not have the wear indicator, so I'm going to place them with the new pad that also does not have the wear indicator. You can see this one right here has the indicator, so let's remove the shims and put it with the new pad. Now go ahead and give yourself some room to clean off the old shims. I'm going to spray these down with some brake clean and then use the wire brush to break up any old dirt and grease. Then you can spray them down and wipe them clean with a rag or a towel. Once they look relatively clean like these, go ahead and place them in this order and orientation. This will make it easy to place them together and will leave the guesswork out of it when you start applying the brake lube. I personally like this lubricant from Permatex. Now you want to apply the lube to all 6 parts. Let me show you what I mean. You want to apply a thin layer on the back of the brake pads like this. Then grab the shim that looks like it has vents and place it directly on top of the brake pad in this orientation. Go ahead and apply another thin layer of the lube to the shim. Finally, you can grab the last shim and place it on the other shim. Then apply a thin layer again and that side will be done. Perfect. Now do the same thing to the other pad and shims. Apply a thin layer of grease, move the shim to the pad, apply another thin layer, move the last shim onto the other shim, and finally apply the last thin layer of lube. Try to prevent the lube from overflowing over the edges if you can. Just wipe it off if it does. There are only two edges you need the lube to be on, and that's both sides like this. Again, apply another thin layer to both sides on both brake pads. Perfect. Now we can get them installed. Let's start with the inner pad. Remember, this one needs to be the pad with the wear indicator. This will be obvious, but you want the pad to face the rotor, and the back plate that has the brake lube and shims need to be facing away. So it should be inserted just like this. If the pad is slightly difficult to insert into the space between the caliper and the rotor, you will probably have to move the rotor around a little bit. You will see the rotor move towards me right here. That created just enough of a gap to slide that pad into place. Don't slide it in too much though, or else you will have to reach around the back of the caliper and push the pad back in place. You want these two ears to be lined up with the holes in the caliper. That's where the pins will slide in to hold the pads in place. Now we can grab the outer pad and install it. Same thing with the inner pad. I had to wedge the pad in and then pulled back on it to get the rotor pushed back. Then it slid right into place, as you can see. And remember, the top ears, as I call them, need to be flush with the caliper so the pins can slide right through. Let's get those pins installed now. Go ahead and apply some brake lubricant to the pins before inserting them through the holes. That's probably too much, but I'll show you why it doesn't matter. Once you push the pin through, the excess will build up at the end here just like this. Oh, and if the pin doesn't slide right in, you will have to move the brake pads in and out a little bit to get the holes to line up. Go ahead and wipe the excess lube off, and then we can move on to the bottom pin. Just like the top one, apply your brake lubricant. Then start pushing the pin through. However, do not go all the way like the top pin. For the bottom pin, you will need to grab this spring and ensure the pin goes through both sides to hold it. You need to make sure yours is in the correct orientation. Mine was not, so I had to pull the pin back out and flip the spring around. You essentially want the two pieces that stick out on both ends to wrap under the pin, and the middle triangle looking piece to be above the pin. Then you need to push the ends up and into the holes in the brake pads like this. Perfect. That's exactly how it should look. Now we can attach the last spring to lock the pins in place. If you look closely, you can see two small holes in each end of the pins. You need to push each end of the spring through both sides of the holes. Also, make sure this part of the spring is in this orientation because you are going to push it through the back side of the caliper and through this hole. That's what will hold it in place and prevent it from loosening up over time. If you are having trouble lining up the spring with one of the pinholes, try to spin the pin a little bit. That should allow you to push the pin through. Let's get the wheel back on. Go ahead and remove the lug nut and then apply a thin amount of anti-seize to the rotor's hat just like this. This will prevent the wheel from sticking to it the next time you try to remove it. Next, grab your wheel and line up the holes with the wheel studs. Then start threading the lug nuts in. There are two different torque specs for these Tundras. It all depends on if your wheels are steel or aluminum. I'll show you how to check that in a little bit. Before lowering your truck, you want to hand tighten these lug nuts. Next, I'm going to lower the truck back onto the ramps. Now, let's find out what kind of wheels are on this truck. All you need is some kind of magnet. If the magnet sticks to the surface of the wheel, then you have steel wheels and will need to torque the lug nuts down to 154 foot-pounds. If the magnet does not stick to the wheel, then you know you have aluminum wheels and will need to torque the lug nuts down to 97 foot-pounds. You can see it stick to the steel lug nuts, but not the wheel itself. So I'm going to torque these down to 97 foot-pounds. I will start with a crisscross pattern, and then we'll go back over each lug nut to make sure they are properly torqued. Just like that. Now we can move on to the other side. Let's start by loosening all 5 lug nuts first with our breaker bar. Remember, if you try to loosen them with the wheel off the ground, you will struggle because the wheel will want to spin too. So you want to do it where the wheel can't spin on its own. Once they are loose, we can use our jack to lift the wheel up and off of the ramp. If you have a floor jack made for trucks, you won't need ramps or this 2-in-1 jack I am using. Regardless, I'm going to put the jack under the control arm, about right here, and then get that tire off of the ground. I eventually bought myself a big floor jack and will link it down below with some jack stands. If you are interested in this 2-in-1 jack I'm using, I will put that down there too. It has this locking mechanism, so when your tire has enough clearance from the ground, you just push the lock up and then slowly let the jack down. You can see it stabilized right there. That's just like resting the truck on a jack stand. Moving on. Once the tire is off the ground, I'm going to pull the ramp out of the way and I will remove the rest of the lug nuts with my impact wrench. In most cases, someone would have used anti-seize on the rotor's hat to prevent the wheel from sticking to it. The last shop that worked on this truck, however, did not. So now comes the fun part. Through a series of hitting the wheel with my palm, spraying penetrated fluid where the wheel and rotor meet, and then kicking the wheel with the bottom of my foot while turning it, the wheel finally fell off. It took me a good 5 minutes to get off, so just be prepared if you run into the same issue. Now with the wheel off, we can get to work on the brake pads and their hardware. Starting with the spring in the back, you will have trouble if you try to pry it out from the middle. What you want to do is pull from the top near the pin so that it separates just like that. Then do the same at the bottom pin. Perfect. Now let's go to move on and loosen the bottom spring. You won't be able to remove it because the spring is wrapped around the pin, but we can still pull it out of the 2 holes in the brake pads so it can be removed easily after removing the pin. If your pins don't move easily, you can grab a hammer or a rubber mallet like I am using and hit the back of the pins like this. Do this for both of them. If the pins still don't slide out easily, go ahead and grab a punch or a small screwdriver and use that to push the pin straight through, just like that. Do the same thing for the bottom pin and then we can move on. And don't forget to remove your spring. At this point, I decided to grab my slip joint pliers and clamp down on the brake pad and edge of the caliper. This will squeeze the caliper's piston in and allow you to remove the brake pad more easily. The pad may still be a little difficult to remove, so just wiggle it back and forth until it slides out. Just like on the passenger side, these pads will have 2 shims on the outside that need to be transferred to the new pads. I'll show you that in a little bit. Go ahead and do the same thing with the inner pad and then remove it. Take note that the inner pad again has the wear indicator, just like on the passenger side. Now let's flip around to the other side and spray both caliper bolts with penetrating fluid. Considering that the bolts on the passenger side were difficult to remove, I'm going to assume this side will be no different and we'll just start with the penetrating fluid. Let it sit for at least 5 minutes, then wipe off the bolt heads with a rag or a towel so your socket doesn't slide off and strip the bolt head. While the fluid is settling, now would be a good time to remove that 12mm bolt that holds the brake hose in place. After removing the bolt and pushing the brake hose bracket out of the way, go ahead and screw the bolt back into the hole to prevent from losing it. Now I tried to remove the caliper bolts with my impact again. Luckily, I was able to get the top bolt loosened. Remember, you don't want to remove the top bolt all of the way or else the caliper will swing down on you. Keep it in there as an anchor to hold it after removing the bottom bolt. After trying to remove the bottom bolt with my impact and failing, I decided not to waste too much time like I did on the passenger side and I grabbed my breaker bar. This worked perfect as you can see. Then I removed the bolt the rest of the way with my impact. Alright, now we can grab our S-hook and then hold onto the caliper as we remove that top bolt. Once that's removed, we can move the caliper out of the way and then mount it in a secure location. I typically put the S-hook around the spring. Just like on the passenger side, you want to use a brake pad and then a caliper tool like this one to push the pistons back into the caliper. You will see the gap on this side close more and more each time I use this tool. Don't forget to check your master cylinder to make sure the fluid isn't overflowing. Once it tightens up, you will know the pistons are flush and then you can remove the tool and the old brake pad. Now this rotor is stuck and I'm going to grab my rubber mallet and hit the edges to loosen it up. Make sure you avoid hitting the wheel studs. You can see all of the rust flying off with each hit. It probably wouldn't be a bad idea to put a mask on, but that's up to you. Once the sound of the mallet hitting the rotor starts to change, go ahead and remove the rotor and then any big pieces of rust that you can see resting behind it. Then grab your brake clean and spray it down. While you are waiting for that to dry, go ahead and grab your new rotor and spray it down with brake clean too. Do this for both sides and then wipe it off with a rag. Now before you install the new rotor, you are going to want to apply some anti-seize to the hub surface like this. This will prevent the new rotor from sticking like that old one did. And remember, try not to get any on the wheel studs. Now we can grab our new rotor and put it on. Then grab a lug nut and screw it onto one of the wheel studs to hold the rotor in place. Perfect. Let's grab the 2 caliper bolts and put some thread locker on them before we install the caliper. If you try this while holding the caliper on the rotor, you will have a tough time. Then we can grab our caliper and put it into place. Once it's in place, go ahead and start threading in the caliper bolts. You can use a socket wrench to tighten it down, just don't tighten them all the way until you have both bolts in. Once they are both screwed in, we can grab our torque wrench and torque both caliper bolts down to 73 foot-pounds. There's one, and there's 2. Now we can grab that 12mm bolt and put some thread locker on it, even though that's probably unnecessary for this, and then get that brake hose bracket installed again. Go ahead and thread it in. Slightly tighten it down, then torque the bolt down to 11 foot-pounds. Just like that. Now we can move on to the new brake pads. Remember to take note which pads have the wear indicator and align them together. Then separate the shims from the old pad and place them under the new pad. Do the same thing with the other side. Once you get organized, go ahead and spray the shims down with some brake clean and then wipe them off with a rag or a towel. You don't need them to be spotless, but you want to try to remove as much of the old dirt and grease as you can. Once they are clean, let them sit for a few minutes to allow them to dry. Now we can apply our grease. You want to start by putting brake lubricant on the back of the pads, and then once you have a thin layer, go ahead and place the middle shim on the pad. Remember, the outer shim does not have those vent holes in them. Make sure you place another thin layer of brake lube on top of the middle layer. Then do the exact same thing with the outer shim. Perfect. Repeat this on the other side. The reason you only want a thin layer is because these shims will flatten once the caliper pushes on them. If you use too much grease, it will leak out, and the last thing you want is grease flying all over your rotor as you are driving and trying to brake. Also, don't forget to add brake lube to the sides of the pads just like we did on the passenger side. I had to go back later to apply it because I forgot. Alright, I'm going to start with the pad that has the wear indicator. Remember, this goes on the inside. And also, just like on the passenger side, you may need to wiggle the pad back and forth just to get it to set. You will be able to pull the rotor towards you, but you want to be careful if your hands have grease on them. You don't want to get that on the rotor. Eventually the pad will slide into place. Try to align the holes in the pad with the holes in the caliper. This will make it easier to get those pins installed. Let's do that now. Grab your first pin and apply some brake lube to it. If the holes aren't aligned, you will have to push the pad in or out until the pin can slide through. Mine just needed to be pushed in a little bit and then the holes aligned perfectly so my pin can go right through it. Now do the same thing with the back pad and then push the pin all the way through. You always want to start with the top pin because once you get that aligned, the bottom pin will most likely slide right through without issue. That's beneficial because we need to slide the pin through the bottom spring. And if the holes in the pad and the caliper aren't aligned, then it would be slightly more difficult to do that while holding the spring. I'll show you what I mean. After cleaning up the excess brake lube, go ahead and grab the bottom pin and apply a thin layer of grease to it. Now you can slide the pin in, and as you can see, there was no resistance because everything lined up. Go ahead and push one end of the spring over the pin, and then as you are sliding the pin in the rest of the way, make sure the other end of the spring is lined up with the pin so it goes through it. Wipe the excess grease off, and then we can get that spring in place. This is easy. You just need to push the ends of the spring into the holes of the brake pads, just like that. Do the same with the other side. It's important to note that the ears on the spring, I call them ears, they need to rest on the top of the brake pad like they are right here. The spring is important in pushing the pads off of the rotor just enough so they aren't touching as you are driving. Let's move on to the other spring. The pins have holes in the ends that the spring needs to slide through. Push one end in, and then the other. Then slide the middle part in through the hole of the caliper. That's all there is to it. This spring is responsible for holding the pins in place. Again, if you haven't yet, now is a great time to remove that S-hook that we were using to hold the caliper earlier. Let's get that wheel back on. First, you need to remove the lug nut that was holding the rotor in place as we were mounting the caliper. Then grab your anti-seize and apply a thin coat to the rotor's hat. This is the part that connects with the wheel and will prevent it from sticking in the future. Once that's covered, we can grab our wheel and place it over the wheel studs. Make sure your lug nuts are close to you before doing this so that we can immediately start threading them on while holding the wheel in place. Get all of the lug nuts hand tight, and then we can grab our socket wrench and snug each one down. Make sure you do this in a crisscross pattern. Now we can grab our ramp and line it up with our tire like this. Then, you want to raise the tire up just enough to clear the ramp so you can slide the ramp underneath of it. Perfect. Go ahead and lower the tire onto the ramp and then pull your jack and or jack stands out from underneath the truck. Finally, we can torque down the lug nuts to 97 foot-pounds. Remember, these are aluminum wheels. If you have the steel wheels, you need to torque the lug nuts down to 154 foot-pounds. If you are only doing the front brakes, now is a good time to put the cap back on the master cylinder and finally go ahead and slowly back off the ramps. Let's replace the rear brakes now. You first want to remove the cap to the master cylinder and then let it rest on top to prevent dirt and debris from falling in. Then make sure you chalk off the front wheels if you are in an incline. Now we can jack up the rear of the truck. I like to position the jack under the leaf spring seat. Once the wheel is high enough off the ground, you can lower the axle onto a jack stand, or if you have a 2-in-1 jack like this one, make sure the safety lock is engaged and then lower the jack. Just like that. Let's remove our lug nuts. These are 22mm, and if you don't have an electric ratchet like this, you will need to break the lug nuts free with a breaker bar before you raise the wheel off of the ground. Once they are all removed, hopefully your wheel will come off as easily as this one did. If not, you will need to get creative. More on that later in the video. Now you are going to want to grab a 17mm socket, and then you want to remove these two bolts right here. These are your caliper slide pins, and removing them will free the caliper from the caliper bracket. Let's get them removed. You may have some trouble loosening them as rust and debris can lock these pins up over time. If yours are tough to remove, grab yourself a breaker bar, or do what I'm doing, which is put a pipe over the end of your wrench and then use that for more leverage. That should break the pin free. As you can see, it helped me. Now do not remove that top pin yet. You only want these pins loose to start. Do the same with the bottom pin and then we can move on. Once the bottom pin is loose, go ahead and remove it. Then loosen the top pin almost all the way until it's ready to come out. Kind of like that. Now you can either use a S-hook like I used on the front brakes, or you can grab the caliper and place it directly on top of the bump stop on the leaf spring right here. This is a perfect mounting place for the caliper, and it will prevent it from falling off as you were working on your truck. Now we need to remove these two 19mm bolts to get the caliper mounting bracket off. Before you try to loosen the bolts, do yourself a favor and put some penetrating fluid on them. Let me show you why. These bolts are only supposed to be torqued down to 70 foot-pounds. Under normal circumstances, that should not be too difficult to remove. So first I tried to remove the bottom bolt with the breaker bar. That bolt did not break free. However, the adapter I was using did not survive. These adapters I have are pretty heavy duty, so these bolts are way over torqued in my opinion. Knowing that, we know it would be a good idea to bring out the penetrating fluid, right? Nope, I decided to try the top bolt with a ratchet with a pipe over the end. Can you guess what happened next? If you guessed the ratchet would break, you are right. You can see the end that holds the socket in place is clearly broken now. So now we should use the penetrating fluid, right? Nope, I'm still being stubborn and decided to use my electric impact. There wasn't enough room for the top bolt, so I tried the bottom bolt, and nothing happened. I finally gave in and sprayed some WD-40 on each bolt and let it sit for a while. Before removing the bolts, you kind of want to remove the pads first anyway. So while the penetrating fluid is doing its thing, go ahead and pull both pads out of the caliper mounting bracket. These still have a decent amount of pad left, however, they are squeaking too much, and there is something funky going on with the shim on the inner pad right here, as it's sticking up when it should be laying flush. Something just isn't right, so we are going to just put new pads on there. After waiting several minutes, let's try to remove those caliper bracket bolts. First, I tried the top bolt, and nope, it still isn't budging. So I decided to try the bottom bolt, and that one broke free. Having to use that much force on a bolt that should only be torqued down to 70 foot-pounds, yeah, I believe these bolts were definitely over-torqued. You can remove this bolt if you want, but I'm going to keep it loose for now. Let's get back to that top bolt and hopefully loosen it without breaking anything. As you can see, this bolt is still being very stubborn. I'm using a good amount of force and it's holding on for dear life. So I decided to try something else. I knew my electric impact would not loosen the bolt, however I figured there's a chance the vibrations caused by the impact could help loosen any rust or debris that may be around the threads of the bolt. I did this for a good 10 to 15 seconds and then grabbed my breaker bar again. And would you look at that? Finally, the bolt is free. I zipped it off some more with the impact and then removed both bolts by hand. The caliper mounting bracket can now be removed. You can also remove the rotor. There will be a little bit of resistance, but you should be able to pull it straight off. When you install the new rotor, you will have to adjust the, adjuster, which is this mechanism right here. You can adjust it by spinning this gear. I'll show you how I did it later on. Since these drums are enclosed, a ton of brake dust settles inside here, so you want to spray it down with some brake clean. Look how much cleaner the adjuster looks now. Let's move on to getting these new pads installed. You are going to want to clean these pins and then apply some lubricant to them. I'm going to use this silicone paste as it will help keep moisture out. You also need to remove these old clips and clean up the bracket with a brush and some brake clean. Then you will need to use a good brake lubricant like I have here to prevent your brakes from squeaking. I'll show you exactly where and what parts to apply this to. This is the kit I will be using from AutoZone. I believe it's a Duralast kit. This is perfect because it also comes with new boots, which is great because the old boots on the bracket are starting to dry rot. Let's get those pins cleaned up. Spray them down with some brake clean and then wipe them off with a rag or a towel. These don't need to look perfect. All you want to do is remove as much of the old dirt and grime as you can. Also take a look at the threads. I decided to take a wire brush to them because there was a little bit of dirt in each thread. Once that's done, give them a spray with your brake clean and then wipe them dry. Now we can move on to our caliper bracket. There are a total of 4 metal clips on these brackets to hold the brake pads in place. These are easy to spot as 2 are right here. And 2 right here. It's a good idea to replace these as over time they will wear down. Also, it helps that they aren't very expensive. Go ahead and grab all 4 of your new clips and lay them next to the caliper bracket. At this point, you want to put them in the same orientation as they are on the bracket. This way, all you need to do is push them on after applying your brake lubricant. Go ahead and remove 2 of the clips from one side. Then you are going to want to clean this area up right here. So grab your brake clean and spray it down. Now grab your wire brush and start cleaning the area that the clips set in. Once you feel like you have removed most of the dirt or debris, go ahead and spray it down with some more brake clean and wipe it with a rag or a towel. These don't need to be perfect, however, it is important to get them pretty clean to prevent uneven wear and brake squeal. Now we can do the same for the other toe. Go ahead and remove them and then put the new clips in the same orientation so it's easy to install. And just like the other side, spray the area with some brake clean and use a wire brush to clean it. Once done, spray it down one more time with your brake clean and then wipe it down with a rag or a towel. One of the best ways to check how clean the surface really is to wipe your finger across it. If it feels like the surface is still rough or has bumps, you want to repeat the cleaning process. If it is smooth, you are ready to move on. Now we can replace those old worn out rubber boots. You will notice one boot goes directly through the caliper bracket and one does not. We are going to start with this one. This is simple, just pull the boot straight off, just like that. This boot is small, so just grab the smaller boot in the kit you bought. Before installing, you are going to want to clean up the area that the boot rests. If there's too much debris in the way, the boot will not sit properly, which can cause moisture to enter and can cause the pins to seize up. So I'm going to take a rag and give it a few wipes. Then you want to grab your boot in this orientation and make sure this end goes in the hole. This is what will lock it in place and prevent moisture from entering. You want to work it from all angles to make sure it sets in the groove of the caliper bracket. Take your time as you don't want to rip the new boot. Once it is flush like this, we can begin with the longer boot. The easiest way is to push this end in to essentially unlock it from the bracket. You can't just pull this end out as it's too difficult. So grab a screwdriver or a punch like I am using and give it a push. Once it goes in like that, you want to grab the other end and start pulling it out. This boot will be stubborn, so get a grip and use some strength to pull it out. It will eventually come out just like that. You can see some rust on the boot, which is why it was a little difficult to pull off. That's a good reason right there to replace these boots. If there is rust on yours like this, that means moisture was present and could have caused problems down the road. Now, I should probably mention, it may be a good idea to apply some silicone paste inside of the hole for this boot and even for the other boot. Silicone paste is a great product to use for many reasons, including the ability to withstand high temperatures, waterproofing, and creating an airtight seal, which is exactly what we need for these rubber boots. I did apply some to the pins, but felt like it was worth mentioning to use it here as well. Alright, so the goal here is to get the boot started in the hole of the bracket and then carefully push the boot in the rest of the way with the punch. Kind of like that. If you are using a screwdriver, don't push too hard as you don't want to puncture the end of the boot. You will want the end to be flush with the caliper bracket, so try to push it back. If it isn't budging, just grab the other end and give it a little pull. Perfect. Now we can grab our brake parts lubricant. You are going to want to apply this to the section that we used a metal wire brush on. That section holds the new brake pad retaining clips, and applying this grease will prevent the pads from squealing. All you need is a light coat like this. That looks good. Now we can put those clips on. Remember to put them on the correct way or else you may run into issues. The small tabs can't go on the inside or else it will scrape the rotor as you are driving. So we need to make sure it's facing away from the middle of the bracket, which means it needs to go right here. Go ahead and line up the clip and then give it a push. That's it. It will hold in place, so let's move on to the next one. Now this clip has a small tab facing to the right, so we can go ahead and push it into this part of the caliper bracket. Just like that. That side is done, so we can flip the bracket around and do the exact same thing with the other clips. Make sure that small tab is facing out and push the clip into place. Do the same with the last clip. If you were unsure what I meant by tab, I'm referring to these little metal parts of the clips that stick out. If they are pointing away from the inside of the bracket, then you know you have put them on correctly. Now you can grab your brake parts lubricant again, and you want to apply them to those clips you just installed. Just like earlier, all you need is a thin layer to prevent brake squeal. Once you are done with one side, go ahead and do the other side. That looks good. Now this is important. You want to grab a rag or a paper towel and carefully place it in this gap here. This is where your rotor will set, and you can see some brake lubricant sticking out. So clean that up a little bit to prevent the lube from getting on the rotor. Make sure you do that for both sides. The easiest way to do this would probably be to sit the bracket down and then place the rag in each slot while moving it back and forth like this. That should clean the area up. Now when we look through those slots, you can see it looks a lot cleaner. That's exactly what you want. Let's move on to the rotor. You will notice a hole right here that is outside of the ring of holes. If you take a look at the old rotor, you will see this rubber grommet with almost like a keyhole in the middle of it. This grommet is there so you can adjust the emergency brake adjuster without taking the rotor off of the truck. So we need to transfer it over to the new rotor. This is simple. Grab a screwdriver or a punch like I am using and then push the grommet out from the inside of the rotor. This will allow the grommet to pop right out. You will notice one side is bigger than the other. The smaller side will be pressed into the rotor. Let's do that now. There isn't a whole lot to this part, just push it in. That's how it should look. Now grab your brake clean and spray the rotor surface down. These new rotors come with a protective oily coating that prevents rust, but we want to remove it to prevent the brake pads from sliding on it. When you are done with one side, go ahead and flip the rotor around and do the exact same thing on the other side. Now we can start putting everything back together. Let's start with applying some anti-seize to the hub surface to prevent the rotor from sticking later on. A thin coat like this will work just fine. Go ahead and grab your rotor and take note of where that adjuster is. So now we can line up the wheel studs with the holes in the rotor and then press the rotor into place. Okay, so this is important. You want to feel a little bit of resistance when pressing the rotor on. If yours slides on very easily like this one did, go ahead and take the rotor back off, carefully placing it on the ground like this with the hat of the rotor facing down. And then we can adjust the e-brake. You are going to want to spin the adjuster just like this, which is clockwise from this angle. You will only need to turn it once or twice, but I did more to show you something. Now if the adjuster is turned too much, the inner pads for the e-brake will push out too far. Then when you grab your rotor, you won't be able to push it on at all. You can see the wheel studs are lined up, but I can't push it on. So take the rotor off and this time spin the adjuster counterclockwise to pull the e-brake's pads back in. You want to do this while checking with the rotor over and over until the rotor pushes back on the studs. As I stated earlier, you can do this with the rotor still in place. You just have to remove the flat grommet. But I'm doing it this way because I feel like it's easier and also because it's easier to show you how this works on camera. At some point, you may have turned the adjuster too far and will have to turn it clockwise again. Just keep doing it until you can feel some resistance on the rotor. Just like this. There's enough resistance telling me that the e-brake pads are in a good place and I'm able to still push the rotor all the way on. That's exactly what you want. Now we can get that bracket installed. You won't need to do this yet, but I'm going to apply the silicone paste to these pins so I don't have to worry about doing it later. Again, just like with the brake lubricant and anti-seize, all you need is a thin layer. That looks good. Now before putting your bracket on, go ahead and apply some thread locker to the caliper bracket bolts. Just a couple of dabs like this will be just fine. Then place your bracket over the rotor and start threading the two bolts in by hand. You want to do this by hand to prevent cross-threading the bolt if you decide to use an electric ratchet. Once they are hand tight, go ahead and torque them down to 70 foot-pounds. I have seen different torque specs for these and the caliper bolts online, and it seems most people torque all four of those bolts to 70 foot-pounds. Just make sure you check your Haynes manual or service manual. If they are different, please leave a comment below letting me know what you are seeing. That way I can update the description with the correct torque specs. Now that those are done, we can grab our caliper and special tool and get that piston pressed in. You want to place it in just like this and then ratchet away. What this is doing is every time it ratchets, it is pressing outwards, which is what we need to get that piston pressed in. You can use a C-clamp on this, but if you have this tool, then you might as well use it. You can see the piston getting pressed in right there. Once the tool bottoms out and you can't press it in anymore, go ahead and flip the little switch to reverse the ratcheting mechanism and then push the handle again. This will release the tool from the caliper and allow you to remove it. Go ahead and place the caliper back onto the bump stop because we need to install the brake pads first. Before you just put the pads onto the bracket, you will need, I know this is repetitive, but I'm going to say it again, a thin layer of brake lubricant on the back and a little on the little nubs on the side of the pads. That's how it should look. Now when installing, you will see there is a small curve to the pad. That part needs to face the bottom and the larger curve up top. Also, when pressing it onto the bracket, you want those two nubs to slide into these two ports on the metal retaining clips we installed earlier. Try to keep it even and then press it in all the way. Perfect. If the shim pops up for any reason, just go ahead and press it back into place until it's flush with the back of the brake pad. Do the exact same thing with the other side. Apply grease to the back of the pad and then on the two sides. Now carefully press the pad into place until it sets flush with the rotor. Just like that. Now you can grab your caliper and carefully place it over the bracket. The main thing to pay attention to are the boots. You want to try to compress them before sliding the caliper into place, or else they may be pushed back and the holes will not be lined up with the holes in the caliper. You can see I'm trying to push the caliper slide pin in right here, but it's not going in because that bottom boot is not setting correctly. If this happens to you, do not force the pin in place or else you may damage the boot. Just readjust the boot and caliper as needed until the pin can slide right through. Perfect. Now do the exact same thing with the top pin. Make sure the boot and caliper are lined up and then push the pin all the way in. Go ahead and give both pins a couple of turns by hand to get them started. This is always a good idea to do before you use your ratchet, or else you may run the risk of cross-threading. Now you can grab your ratchet and tighten the pins down until they bottom out. Alright, now we can torque these caliper slide pins down to 70 foot-pounds. There's one, and there is two. Let's get that wheel back on. First, you want to start with applying some anti-seize to the rotor's hat like this to prevent the wheel from sticking to it down the road. Try not to get any on the 5-wheel studs. If you do, make sure you wipe it off with a rag or a towel. Now you can place the wheel onto the studs. It would be a good idea to have your lug nuts close by so you can just start screwing them on. Alright, go ahead and start threading the lug nuts on. You want to make sure they are all bottomed out before you lower the truck back onto its wheel. So go around multiple times and make sure each lug nut is tight. Once you make sure they are, you can now lower the truck. If you are using a jack like mine, you want to put the two poles together and then jack the truck up a bit. This will bring the locking mechanism up, which in turn unlocks it and will allow you to push it up and then lower the truck all the way to the ground. You may need to push the top down a little bit to clear the axle. Go ahead and remove the jack. Now we can torque our lug nuts down to 97 foot-pounds because we have aluminum wheels. If we had steel wheels, we would be torquing them down to 154 foot-pounds. Make sure you torque them down in a star pattern. Once they are all tight, go ahead and go around one more time to make sure they are properly torqued to spec. Perfect. Alright, now we can move on to the other side and finish the rear brakes. Let's start out by getting the tire off of the ground. You want to start by loosening the lug nuts first. Then we can place our jack under the leaf spring seat and start lifting the wheel off of the ground. I'm also going to place a jack stand under the rear sway bar as an added security measure. Go ahead and lower the jack when you have the jack in place and the wheel is high enough off of the ground. Now we can remove the 22mm lug nuts. And then pull the wheel off and set it to the side. Just like on the driver's side, we can start by removing the two 17mm caliper slide pins. You can use a breaker bar or place a metal pipe over the end for additional leverage. Once both pins are loose, go ahead and remove them. There's one, and there is two. We will clean these up in a little bit. Once your caliper doesn't lift right off, go ahead and pull them back like this. That helps compress the piston just enough so you can remove the caliper. And just like on the driver's side, I'm going to place the caliper on the bump stop right here. Now we can break loose those 19mm caliper bracket bolts. This time I'm going to use a breaker bar. I had good luck with both of these, unlike the other side. You can remove both brake pads now if you want. They typically will pull out just like this. However, for some reason the back pad would not. This isn't a big deal because you can easily remove them with the bracket off of the rotor. Once both bolts are removed, you can remove the caliper bracket. Now with it off of the rotor, you can see it's easy to remove that old pad. This one had plenty of pad left. However, since we are already replacing all the other pads, I'm going to replace these as well. Now go ahead and remove the old clips and place the new clips right under them in the same orientation. Once that's done, bust out the brake clean so we can clean the area the clips rest in. Spray it down and then use your wire brush to clean the area. Spray it down again to wash away the dirt and debris. Then do the same thing for the other side. You can see how much cleaner they look when doing this. Go ahead and give the area a wipe with a rag or a towel and then feel it with your finger. You want it to feel smooth. If there are bumps and it feels a little rough, make sure you use the wire brush some more to remove the foreign matter so those clips can set flush and allow the brake pads to move properly. Now you want to grab your brake parts lubricant and apply it to the same area that you just cleaned. And as I said 100 times earlier, you just want to apply a thin coat. Here's a fun little game. How many times in this video have I said apply a thin coat? Keep in mind I also said it for the anti-seize and silicone paste. Let me know in the comments what your best guess is. Also, you should probably remove the old rubber boots before applying the lube to keep things clean. So let's remove those now. Starting with the longer boot, you will want to use a screwdriver or a punch like I am using right here. Push this end in, remove the screwdriver or punch, and then pull the boot straight out. This one came out easier than the other side, and you can see why. There isn't any rust dust on the inside of the boot, so moisture did not enter and seize anything, which is exactly what we want. Now the other side is easy. Just pull it straight off. Oh, and don't forget what I said earlier. It's probably a good idea to apply some silicone paste to the inside right here where the boots go in to help keep out moisture. Starting with the small boot, push it into place and then work the edges in to get it to sit properly. That's how it should look. Moving on to the longer boot, you can place it over the end of your punch and slowly and carefully push it into the caliper bracket. If you are using a screwdriver, be very careful as you do not want to push too hard as you will run the risk of piercing the boot. You want to push it in just enough so the end sits flush. Now we can grab our new clips and start inserting them into the bracket. They can easily be pushed into place. And remember, the small tabs need to be facing out. So the left side, they need to be on the left. And the right side needs to be on the right. Just push it on. You can see they both fit perfectly into the groove of the bracket. Let's do the same thing with the other side and then we can move on. Again, tab on the left faces to the left. Push the clip into place. And the tab on the right faces to the right, and then push that clip into place too. Now that the clips are locked in place, you know what comes next, right? Yep, we need to apply yet another thin layer of brake lube to the clips. Perfect. Now place your caliper bracket just like this so we can clean up some of that brake lube. And place your rag or towel in like this and then give it a few wipes. Do this for both sides and that should do it. You can see by looking down the tunnel that it looks very clean, which is exactly what we want. Let's get that old rotor off of there. Just pull it straight off. And then clean up the new rotor by spraying it down with brake clean and wiping it dry. Do this for both sides. Don't forget to remove that grommet from the old rotor and transfer it to the new one. Just push it out from the back and then push it onto the front of the new rotor. Now, clean up those caliper slide pins. Then spray down the wheel hub where the e-brake assembly is. While that's drying, go ahead and apply some thread locker to the caliper bracket bolts. Okay, so now we can get that rotor installed. Just like the driver's side, you want to find the adjuster and then make sure the grommet rests over it if you decide to adjust the e-brake while the rotor is installed. I'm going to take the rotor off each time as this is easier for me and we'll keep adjusting as needed. Eventually you want there to be a little bit of resistance when you put the rotor on. And if you go too far and the rotor won't go on at all, then you need to spin the adjuster in the opposite direction. This will pull the pads back in and allow you to place the rotor back over the hub. Once you are able to put the rotor on and you feel some resistance, you are good to move on. Now you can grab the bracket and carefully put it into place. Then grab one of the bracket bolts, which you should already have thread locker on it, and then begin threading it on by hand. Do the same thing with the bottom bolt, and then you need to torque these down to 70 foot-pounds. There's one, and two. Now would be a good time to apply some silicone paste to the caliper slide pins so you don't forget later. Also, let's compress the caliper piston to get that out of the way. Go ahead and grab your tool and start ratcheting away. Then, place it back on the bump stop for now. Now we can get those brake pads installed. So, go ahead and grab your new brake pad and start applying your brake parts lubricant to the back of the pad like this. And don't forget the 2 contact points on the ends right here and right here. Just apply it to the tabs that stick out. Then you can push the pad into place like this. Those tabs on the pad you want to go into the metal clips you installed earlier on the caliper bracket. Now do the same thing with the other side, then we can move on. Perfect. Let's grab our caliper and get it back on the bracket. Remember, when pushing the caliper into place, you also want to push down on the rubber boots so the holes line up with the holes in the caliper. Once both of them are flush, you can grab the caliper slide pins and push them into the caliper holes and through the rubber boots. Now hand tighten the pins and use a socket wrench if need be. Then we can torque these pins down to 70 foot-pounds. There's one, and there's two. Finally, we can get that wheel back on. Remember to apply a thin layer of anti-seize to the rotor's hat to prevent the wheel from sticking in the future. Then put your wheel on and start threading in each lug nut by hand. Now that they are hand tight, let's get the truck off of the jack stand so we can torque the lug nuts down to spec. Alright, so again, since these are aluminum wheels, we need to torque these down to 97 foot-pounds. And make sure you do this in a star pattern. And just like the other wheels, I like to go back over them one more time in a circle to ensure they are all torqued down. We are finally done. Go ahead and put the master cylinder cap back on and then remove the wheel chocks before you take it on a test drive. Let me know down in the comments if this video helped you. That's all there is to it. If you found any part of this video helpful or entertaining, please give it a thumbs up. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button as well as the notification bell so you don't miss a video from our channel. Thanks for watching and we'll see you on the next one.